All right, I'd like to welcome everyone to class this afternoon. Hi there. My name is Joe Legander. I am a training consultant with the Clerk of the Superior Court's office. And this afternoon, it's my pleasure to present you a class. It's both part of our new employee orientation as well as a class for all of our existing staff as well, entitled A Higher Calling, the Code of Conduct for Judicial Employees. Today's training is a pretty complex format compared to a lot of ones that we do because we have really three audiences here today. We have new employees with the clerk's office. For many of you, this is your very first day, so welcome aboard. We also have existing employees, not only for the clerk's office, but for many other agencies. In the past, I used to say we also have old employees, but I found people weren't thrilled with that. So we have existing employees for our own office and others. Welcome to you. And then lastly, we are also being filmed for posterity. So people in the future will be able to watch this via video. And of course, welcome to that future audience as well. In our 2 hours together today, we are going to discuss a topic that is perhaps the single most important topic that is covered within new employee orientation. It is in many ways absolutely central to all we do, no matter what agency you happen to work for in the justice system. And that is ethical behavior. The simple reality is that if you had a justice system that were incredibly efficient, dotted every I, crossed every T, it got the job done right the first time, every time, with every bit of service that you could expect. If that system were at its heart unethical, immoral, if it did not serve the purposes of justice, but instead the purposes of power, then it would be better for you to not have so good of a system. You'd be better off with an incompetent system because it would simply cause less evil. The work that we in the justice system do is very, very challenging work. We deal with conflict and strife and situations that many people find to be some of the hardest elements of their life, and they're brought before us every day in differing ways depending on where you work within that system. And how we handle those is absolutely central to everything that we do. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once noted that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And we have found this to be true on so many levels. He was speaking from the position of dealing with the issue of civil rights. And of course, we have found it to be true there. We've also found it to be true on the international scale. There are countries in the world where there is no effective justice system. It does not exist. Causes are dealt with through either money or power. Those are the two solutions. And we have in the past sometimes thought, well, those countries are far away. That's not our problem. But the events of recent years have taught us that that's not the case. The world gets smaller and smaller, and the simple reality is the kinds of criminal behavior, of degradation, of misery and poverty that exist in such situations inevitably export themselves, and they become our problem. It's also very true within the very local system in which we work, that any one of our behavior has the ability to damage the entire system, far out of proportion than what you might expect. How many of you guys are fans of like police procedurals on TV? Anybody watch shows like Law and Order or those sort of things? Yeah, a few hands go up, CSI, that kind of thing. Television can be entertaining, but it's often not very realistic. One area where police television is often very unrealistic is in DNA tests. You know how DNA is done on TV? They go, yeah, we need to get a DNA test done. And 15 minutes later, the results of that test are back. They're usually sent to the police officer's cell phone, and it has like a picture of the person. Oh, it's you. You did it. You know, it's right there. In real life, DNA testing is expensive, and it takes time. And by no means are all police agencies equipped to deal with such things. So many smaller agencies will send samples to national laboratories. One such lab would be the FBI's crime lab at Quantico, Virginia. A number of years ago, a problem arose when it was discovered that some samples from a crime that had been committed had been sent to this lab, and the technician working on them had made a mistake. He had contaminated the sample, ruining it. Now, the appropriate ethical thing to do would have been to go, I've messed up, I'm sorry, here's what happened, and deal with it. But for whatever reason, that's not what the technician did. The technician instead faked it. He just faked an outcome. He picked and sent it back. This came to light. As you can imagine, the trial, which this evidence was being used in, was immediately declared a mistrial. The sentence was overturned. And it didn't end there. Because of course then, every defense attorney who the cases they'd worked on had been tested by this same individual immediately filed to reopen all those cases, saying, well, wait a minute, if he faked this one, how do we know he didn't fake others? How do we know he didn't fake ours? This individual had been employed for years. Hundreds of cases had to be reopened. In many cases, these things were years old. Prosecutors went, we don't think we can get witnesses back, or we don't have the resources to retry this whole thing. We don't think we can get a conviction now. And so many people who had been convicted were set free. And it didn't end there. Because soon people began to go, wait a minute, even though my test kit wasn't done by this guy, it was done at that lab, and if the lab standards permit for this sort of behavior, who's to say? And many, many hundreds more were opened. The reality is, to this day, no one can say how many guilty men and women walked free as a result of this one man's action. How many people who were assaulted or killed or raped, justice isn't found for them now because of this man's action. And perhaps even worse, we're really not sure if there's someone in jail who shouldn't be. We don't exactly know. This is a fine example of how the single selfish action of one individual, not a police detective, not a judge, not a juror, somebody very much behind the scenes, like many of you will be working behind the scenes. One action creates a wave of contamination and distrust which overturns immense amounts of the work of justice. So in today's class, we're going to be talking about how we must avoid these things in our behavior. One of the things you'll note as we go through this material is it often focuses on the public's perception of us. Now, when you think about it, we sort of focus away from that, don't we? What's the classic phrase? Don't judge a book by its cover. Don't we try to teach our children that? That you shouldn't judge people based on their appearance or their clothing or things like that. And of course, it's a broad, good principle. But within the justice system, we have to recognize a very powerful fact that flies in the face of that. And that's the fact that without public faith in the justice system, there is no justice system. The justice system is nowhere near as strong as television might portray it. On TV, of course, even in real-life events, news, we see SWAT teams and helicopters and armed officers and all these things responding, and we look and say, wow, that's powerful. But the justice system is really only powerful because people believe that it works and are willing to call it, so to speak. Let's see, Monica. Let's say you and I lived next to one another and there was a tree on the property line between our houses. And the tree was endless dispute. You loved the tree. It's a beautiful tree. It gives shade in the summer, and your kids swing in it, and you swung in it when you were a little girl. Your mom swung in that tree. It's been there forever. I hate that tree. I just hate that thing. It sheds leaves all over my lawn, and I'm always worried a microburst is going to put it through my garage. And I'm always telling you to trim it back, and you're always telling me it's your back and forth about property. If you and I simply could not work out a solution between us, where might we turn to find an answer to our problem here? Sure, we'd come to the courts. We'd come to a place such as this, where a neutral arbiter, right, a judge, perhaps a jury, depending on the circumstance, not really so much here, might give us a judgment. And we could appeal if we're not happy, and we'd go through various things. But the reality is, I'm pretty much going to comply with what the courts say. I'm going to hope your answer's the same since you're going to be working here now. But of course, understand, in much of the world, that's not how it works. If you and I were in the Congo, if you and I were in Sudan, if you and I were in many parts of Afghanistan, nobody would go to court. Courts are bought and paid for. The courts are utterly corrupt in many places. You and I would get a gun. Because understand, the only final alternative to a functioning justice system is get a gun. That's the other end of that spectrum. There is the intermediate step of get money, right? Maybe money will pay your way through, but yeah, usually you have to use the money to buy people with guns. So, we provide that alternative. We make it possible for the American experiment, freedom, justice, to prevail. Without a functioning justice system, no such thing can exist. So in today's class, we're going to talk about the ethical heart of the system that all of us are part of. Looking specifically, as you can see up here, canons of ACJA section 1-303, the Code of Conduct for Judicial Employees. This is a code that applies to all of us, all throughout the state of Arizona, if you are a member of judicial staff in any way. There's a similar but stricter code that applies to judges, commissioners, etc. We're going to talk about some of the ethical dilemmas you may run into. Some of you who've been with us a while have already run into some of these things, and you'll see things you recognize. New folks, day one, you're going to find yourself confronted with these issues at some point. And our hope is by the end of this training, you will have a sense of how you should respond when that moment comes, in accordance with our policy, that of the courts, that of Maricopa County. So we have a lot of things we're going to be covering. Now the code itself we're going to be looking at, this is not exhaustive. You may go, after 2 hours, I feel that this has been exhaustive. But, little heads up, the Supreme Court training on this is 4.5 hours. So you're definitely getting the condensed version. And it is complementary to the Code of Judicial Conduct. That's the code that judges and commissioners and people in that realm follow, even more strict than our own. It does not preclude more rigorous standards. In fact, for those of you with the clerk's office, you're going to discover that some of our rules are actually more strict than the code itself. And that's okay. We'll talk about those. And these rules are enforced the same way any other personnel issue would be enforced. All the usual approaches right here. Now, one little note. I know we have people with us today from a number of differing agencies. Again, this is a class put on by the clerk's office, but who else do we have from some different agencies? Who else is here today? Ma'am? Superior Court? Anyone else? Probation, adult or juvenile? No. Okay. Yes? Justice Courts? Anyone else? Okay. Now the thing is, at certain points in the class, I'm going to mention that this is how the clerk's office implements that policy. In those areas, you may have to check with your agency to see how you have chosen to implement certain policies. Because there are some areas where we choose to be more strict or where we have a special type of implementation you may not have. And I'll make sure to note those, so if you're here from another agency, you'll be aware. So let's jump right into it. Canon 1 of our 4 canons. A judicial employee shall uphold and promote the independence, integrity, and impartiality of the judiciary, and shall avoid impropriety, right, improper behavior, and the appearance of impropriety. So let's give some thought to this broadly. Notice there's nothing in it about competence. It doesn't say a word about confidence. It doesn't say like type fast, check your spelling, wear appropriate clothing, show up on time. It's not that those things aren't important. It's just that the code begins at the core of the issue. That everything that we do, all of those things included, are designed to uphold and promote the independence, the integrity, and the impartiality of the judiciary. Notice this, we must avoid impropriety and the appearance of impropriety. In most jobs, it's enough that you be good. In this job, you gotta look good. And by look good, I don't mean nice hair, stylish shoes, something like that. I mean that you must constantly put forward the impression to all of the customers with whom you interact, to people from other agencies, to the public as a whole, that you are incorruptible, unbiased, lacking in any bigotry or discrimination, that you serve only the cause of justice, and that you treat everyone with fairness and honor and integrity. And that's a tough call, because I don't know on a personal level that I really have all those qualities. There are things where I have pet peeves. There are things where certain people might annoy or upset me, certain ideas or attitudes that trouble me. But in this role, we are called upon to lay all such things aside and to constantly put forward the impression and to make it fact by how we actually work that we are incorruptible. So, to begin with, we need to comply with the law ourselves. That's a pretty good place to begin. Now, obviously, particularly for those of you, it's day one. If you're running a meth lab in your basement, odds are you didn't say to yourself, good part-time work, the courts, that would be a good call. That way, if I'm caught, I don't have to walk as far, that sort of thing. But by compliance with the law, I don't mean just the grand things, I also mean the small things. For example, don't jaywalk. Down here, when we're downtown, particularly crossing between buildings and such, follow the law. Don't jaywalk. Wait for the light. Cross at corners. Not only is it safer, but it lets people know that we respect the law we enforce. Traffic laws. Simple things. Many people look at that and they say, well, yeah, really, Joe, 5 miles over, what do you. Let me ask you a question, though. How many of you have witnessed this scenario? You are sitting at a red light, and a police car pulls up next to you. Now, they're not racing up to the light. They just pull up. Their lights and siren are not on. They sit there a minute or two with you, waiting for the light. Suddenly, you hear their siren, whoop, whoop, and they flash their lights. Traffic comes to a halt. They weave out into the intersection and through to the other side. And on the other side, they turn off their lights and siren, and they drive away. They don't race away, they just drive away at normal speed. How many of you have witnessed that event? And take a look around the room, by the way, to get a sense of, how common this event is. Thank you. What just happened? Yeah, they didn't feel like waiting for the light. Now, I'm aware that police are called on silent runs sometimes. They get a call, we need you somewhere fast, no lights, no siren. It could be a hostage situation or some other delicate issue. But when that happens, they blow up to the light at speed, hit the lights and siren to get through, and they race off at speed again. I am willing to accept that 1 or 2 times in my life when that happened, they got a call, and when they got through the light, the call was canceled. But I always have rooms full of people who've seen this, and many of us have seen it on more than one occasion. And I have friends who are cops. It's just what you thought. They didn't want to wait. They wanted to get to lunch. They had somewhere to go. What do you think when you witness that behavior? It is. It's abuse of power. That's all it is. And imagine how you would feel if 2 miles down the road that officer pulled you over for speeding, or that officer pulled you over for running a light. You'd say, that's not right. And you'd be correct. It isn't. That's not just. My wife was a juvenile corrections officer, a badged officer for many years. I remember her explaining to me years ago, oh yeah, I have never got a traffic ticket. As soon as you see the lights behind you, you take your badge out, you lay it on the seat next to you. Cop leans in the window, sees that badge. Just a warning, ma'am, have a nice day. They even have a term for it, professional courtesy. Professional courtesy is the nice word for abuse of power. And even, you might say to yourself, well, police officers bear a lot of risks, and how far would you really want to take that? If your daughter was assaulted in a neighborhood, and it so happened that one of the potential people of interest on scene had a badge, should they not be questioned? Professional courtesy. People with badges never do anything wrong, right? Of course not. So when police do those things, it can be very, very obvious. They're wearing uniforms and they're in marked cars. For us, it might be as simple as you've just got that badge, and that's the only thing that distinguishes you from any other pedestrian downtown. But if we ourselves, who work to make this system happen, will not support the law, why should anyone else? So it is important that we ourselves comply with the law. At work, there's many ways in which we deal with this. We do not use public funds or equipment inappropriately. We have a fine video camera back there. Steve and I cannot use that to film our backyard barbecue. That would be an inappropriate use of the equipment. And we must be careful in our dealings with people who used to work with us but who no longer do, because we have access to kinds of information that once someone's no longer in that role, they have no right to. Now this paragraph is a rather weighty chunk, and I won't read it all through to you, but the concept here is simple, and it's very important, particularly for people who are new. For 12 months after you leave our employ, if you decide to leave here, you cannot take a position in a private company or another organization where you would interact with the part of the court you used to work at in an area where you had a lot of power or insider knowledge that would give an unfair advantage to that other agency. So, Danielle, what are you going to be doing for us?
Courtroom clerk.
Okay, courtroom clerk. So let's say you've been with us a year or two and you've done really, really well. Maybe you've got some extra training in, you're a paralegal, you're just great. A law firm gets a look at you. They like the way you look. They decide to bring you on for twice the money. So you go to work for this law firm. You cannot, 3 weeks later, be working on a case being heard by the judge that you just got done clerking for. There's a concern about bias. You've maybe been clerking for that judge for the last year or 2 years. There's some degree of relationship, and we don't mean anything inappropriate. Just when you work with somebody for years, you have a relationship with them. And so that could add an air of taint to the proceedings. So you could work for that law firm on cases being heard in other courts, other divisions, that sort of thing, but not in that case. Let's take another example. Imagine Crystal. Let's say, I see you're going to be a courtroom clerk too, but we're going to move you around for this one. Let's say you were working in our ITG, right, our Information Technologies group, and in fact, you're the person responsible for purchasing hardware for our office. We buy a lot of Dell computers. You'll see Dell all over, commercial for Dell. And you're the person whose job it is to make those purchases. So you handle the contracting process and you take bids and all of that. You could not work here for a year or two and then go to work at Dell 6 months later selling us computers. You have insider knowledge. You know our bids, you know our contracts, you know the people involved. This would give Dell an unfair advantage. And so you must wait 12 months after leaving our employ to fall into these roles. Now here's the thing. We in the courts have very little power over you when you leave. So truthfully, we can't tell Crystal, you can't go to work at Dell. We can't even tell you can't go to work at Dell in that role. It would be our responsibility here in the courts that if we were to find you in such a role, to refuse to conduct business with you. We would say, Crystal, come on, this is inappropriate. You should not be in that role. On our side, it's unethical for us to conduct business. Sometimes people ask me, why 12 months? I have no idea. That's the number they picked. Some businesses do this and they go with 24 months or 36 months or 6 months. 12 is what the courts decided on. Any questions about this issue? And please, if you do have questions, just jump right in. We said that at the heart of this was the need to promote confidence in the judiciary. This is a very important idea. Americans' overall confidence in their government is certainly at an all-time low. In recent polls, I think the last set of numbers I saw, Americans' overall confidence in the United States Congress was in single digits. It was 9%. They actually put out a list, I think it was the Pew Public Policy poll, but they put out a list asking Americans to rank Congress along with other things. And Congress lost out to head lice. Head lice was deemed a little bit more popular than the United States Congress. So when you're being beaten out by head lice, you have a bit of an issue. There is good news for us, though. The judicial branch, time and again, comes in at the top of such polling numbers. The bad news is the top of those numbers in the last one I saw was only 38%. So 38% of Americans said they trusted the judicial branch. Not great numbers. We have an obligation to be the sort of people, the sort of organizations that will change those numbers. So this means that honesty and truthfulness in all that we do, very, very paramount. And this is true not only in our professional conduct, what you do here, it's also true outside of here. Many people think about work as, well, you come to work and then that's one thing. And then when you go home, you can do whatever else you want. But that's not exactly how it works in the courts. A number of years ago, some of you might even remember, a Tempe police officer was fired from his position when it was discovered that he and his wife were running a pornographic website on the side, where they would post pictures of themselves. I shall leave to your imagination. The police officer sued. He said, you have no right to fire me. First of all, I do that during my off time. It has nothing to do with my work. Secondly, the website is legal. It follows every rule. And he was correct in those issues. The website was perfectly legal, and he did it during his off hours. But in the ensuing case, which he lost, the court said no. Understand, no one is forced to work for the judicial system. Right? You don't have to work in this system. There's plenty of other places you can work. But the nature of this work says that if you should choose to do so, you must accept a greater burden than would apply to other citizens. And in fact, you must avoid any behavior that would create in reasonable minds a perception of moral failing. Now, pornography is an issue which there's plenty of debate on. Some people feel that pornography is simply no big deal. Some people think it's a terrible evil. And some people think it's quite good. I will not weigh in on this issue. That's not really at the heart of the court's argument. The heart of the court's argument was simply there are many, many citizens who would look at that and it would cause them to call into question your moral judgment. Imagine the scenes recently we saw in Boston, for example. Quite terrible. Police officers on the street issuing orders to civilians, get inside, do this, watch out because there's this terrible danger. Can you imagine that officer in such a scene where someone turns to him and goes, aren't you Officer Nasty? I saw your melee out. That you can see how instantly this would simply undermine the authority of the person involved for many people. And so the court said no. It's not just like being a private citizen. It's different. And the same is true for all of us. It means there are limits and constrictions that we face that the average citizen would not. ultimately, all of the ethical issues we're going to talk about here deal with this idea, in fact, that you brought up abuse of power. That's what it fundamentally comes down to. For those of you who are brand new, you're going to come back for a second day of NEO in the near future. And on that day, you're going to get some training in your educational requirements. And one of the things you'll discover is that there's numerous different classes people are required in different jobs to continue employment within the court system. So for example, those of you who are courtroom clerks, every year you have to take annual biohazard refresher training. I actually teach that. We have it shot on video. That's because in the courtroom you may have to handle objects that are covered in blood or other human bodily fluids, and that if you handle them inappropriately could result in you being injured. So every year you have to take this training. 2 handy tips. I would not recommend taking it during your lunch hour or on Valentine's Day. It's going to ruin either of those for you because, you know, it's yucky. Drivers are going to take defensive driving training because they're driving our courier vans and such. We want them to be safer on the road. And we could look at people in different agencies. Parole officers have certain things they need to take. Clerks have certain training they have to take all around. But there's one thing that everybody has to sit through year after year after year. The Chief Justice of the Arizona Supreme Court has to go through it every year. Michael Jeans, the clerk for our organization, every year has to sit through it. And tomorrow, if we hire somebody brand new in facilities maintenance, they too will have to sit through it. And it's what you're sitting through right now, ethics. Now, on the face of it, that might seem a little odd. We really going to make the presiding judge sit through ethics? They spend all year long issuing these sentences and have all this, and yet every year ethics. Why do you think ethics is the one and only class, it's worth noting, that everyone is required to take every year? What do you think? Some reasons.
You come across new situations that are constantly changing.
That's a very good point. You know, one of the reasons this class has been required, this specific class rather than just ethics, is because the code was recently changed. And of course, we are facing all sorts of changing circumstances. One of the standards for pornography used to be that if it was deemed as pornography within a local community, that was one of the standards, did this meet? Was it considered obscene? But today we have the internet. So if I'm in New York and I live in Times Square, let's say, and I post some pornography to the internet from Times Square, which in New York people just not even bat an eye at, but you view that pornography in Wichita, Kansas, which community standard applies? So yes, all sorts of new situations arise. That is a very good reason. Why else? In the back. A reminder. Yeah. The simple reality is anybody over time can become complacent, a little sloppy, a little lax. So it is something that should be brought to our attention again and again to make sure that we're aware. I'll go with that. What else? Anyone else? Well, there are a lot of good reasons, but there's one that I do like to highlight. One that many people don't even give much thought to, but particularly those of you who are here for your first day really should. You now work for the branch of government, really the only branch of government here in Arizona, that has the power to put a man or woman to death. A lot of people, if you're not exactly in certain roles, don't think much about that. Just recently we had the Arias trial. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this, where a young woman was on trial and one of her potential sentences is death. We're still in the penalty phase, determining how that will go. But for example, as a courtroom clerk, there's every reality that you could be in such a room and that you could be part of the process that will sentence a man or woman to die. The reason that we have to take ethics year after year after year is that we work in places of tremendous power. Many of us don't immediately connect with that, but it is very true. And it's not just death sentences. The organization that we work for, the buildings in which we work, every week, men and women come to us, either in person or through paperwork and representatives, They promised they would be together forever. And it's decided within one of our rooms that no, they won't. And the children of that marriage, it is determined in this process whether they will go home with the mother or the father, or in some cases, neither of them. The entire course of that family's history will be changed based on the work that we do in these rooms. People come to our organizations every week who've been beaten, robbed, abused, cheated, raped, molested. They have had their selves violated. They've had their property violated. And they have a chance in the rooms where we work, through the process that we manage, to point and say, that's the person who did this to me. That's the agency that did this. And it will be determined in that room, in this process, whether, say, that individual goes to jail for the next 30 years, or is hit with a multi-million-dollar fine, or simply walks free. In the clerk's office alone, over $200 million will exchange hands every year for things such as victim restitution, marriage licenses, child support. All over the city every night, children will eat because of the work that we do. Children will have clothes because of the work that we do. Abuse of power is an immense issue for us, and it's why we have to take ethics over and over again, and every judge does and everyone else, because if you're going to trust people with that kind of power, they have to be worthy of it. So, we must never use the power that we possess, and all of you, no matter what you do, are going to have a piece of that power in your hands. We must never use it for ourselves to secure special deals, special privileges, special exemptions. There's many ways this will play out. The two most common, those of you who are brand new, I'd like to make a prediction. Within your first year with us, you are going to be asked by someone you know one of two things. You're going to be asked to either fix a parking ticket for them or get them out of jury duty. Those are the two that I think are very, very common. I cannot tell you the number of times people said, dude, you work at the courts, right? Can you get me out of jury duty? It's like, I can't even get me out of jury duty. Yes, as in court employees, you are eligible for jury duty. And that thing where you go, well, my employer won't let me, that's not going to fly, obviously. But you'll get these things. We must never provide special treatment to our friends, to our family. If you have a sister and she's going through a divorce, she stands in line like everybody else. She receives the same smiling, friendly treatment that everybody else does, but no better. We must be very careful not to try to use the court's name or reputation to gain an advantage. Anyone here have young kids preparing for preschool or preschool age kids? Okay, just a few. No. I understand nowadays that if your kid doesn't get into the right preschool, it's all over for them, right? Isn't that it? Like if Buffy doesn't get into the Wyndham Academy, then, you know, it's... So we've had individuals put in their preschool application to elite, let's say, schools on court letterhead. Now, what are they trying to do by that? Why are they submitting their application letter on court letterhead? What's their purpose? Sure, they're hoping to influence the outcome, and it could be one of two ways. One is to go, I'm not a judge, but I hang around people like that. You know, see, I work in a place of power. I know the right people. Buffy would be a fine choice for your school. That's actually the more benevolent of the two. Because the other, darker one is, I work in a place that if my daughter doesn't get into your school, that could be a problem for you. That's the darker side of it. But in either case, it's nothing but an abuse of power. It's trying to levy the court's respect or position for personal gain, and therefore inappropriate. We must never use our position to request or to pressure or to give gifts or bribes or anything like this, or to give out confidential information to people who don't have the right to it. At all times, we must remember that we work in a place of power, and we must guard that power and treat it with the respect that it deserves. Do I have any questions on Canon 1? Then let's move on to Canon 2. A judicial employee shall perform the duties of judicial employment impartially, competently, and diligently. Notice the word competent only appears now in Canon 2. Canon 1 says we ask you to be good. Canon 2 says you must be good for something. Let's try to develop some skill, some ability. Yes, being good is important, but we also need you to be good at what you do. You must be competent. You must be diligent. Our ethical duties do take our highest priority. If you ever find yourself in a moment where it comes down to efficiency, speed, or ethics, customer service or ethics, ethics always wins. That's job number one. We try to get those other things too. We must act without bias or prejudice. And I actually liked the language of this. This was from the order itself. Not influenced by partisanship, public clamor, or fear of criticism or reprisal. I like the phrase public clamor, like a loud noise. We have a lot of public clamor, do we not? Of course, we're a country, there's a lot of public clamor. There's people with very passionate views on many different issues. You could be pro-gay marriage. You could be against gay marriage. You could be pro-choice. You could be pro-life. You could be conservative, liberal, pro-drones, against drones. There's endless different topics. And we don't expect that because you come to work for us, you will not have opinions. But those opinions must never influence the work that you do in practical terms. This is not to say your ethical values won't affect your work. Of course they will. But our opinions on these hot-button topics always have to be put to the side in light of our duties to the judicial system. Now, there's many ways this plays out. We do not discriminate, for example. And of course, all the categories that most of you are familiar with from doubtless many jobs before this. We have people of many differing ages throughout the room. For some of you, you may have been at many jobs, and for some of you, this may be one of your earliest bits of work. I don't know. But in all places nowadays, we learn we do not discriminate based on race, or gender, or age, or national origin, sexual orientation, all these sorts of categories. But there's one other that's very important for us to remember. We also don't discriminate against somebody based on their criminal status. As I mentioned recently, we just had the Arias trial. Many people have strong opinions about Jodi Arias. You may feel one way, you may feel the other. And you, of course, have a right to such opinions. But should you find yourself, clerk's office employee, in a position where you were standing in front of this young lady, providing some sort of service, you're dealing with document filing or anything, she gets the exact same friendly, smiling treatment everybody else gets. Good morning, ma'am. Welcome to the clerk's office. How can I help you today? We are not the part of the system that judges. We have a part of the system that judges. We call them judges. It narrowed it down easily for us. We are not the part of the system that investigates. Right? We have arresting agencies and things like that. And this is very important. We are not the part of the system that punishes. We have correctional facilities, officers who deal with those issues. We at the clerk's office are neutral record keepers. It is our job to observe what happens, to record it accurately, and to disseminate that information to people who have a right to it. It is our job to act as the fiduciary for the court's money and make sure it is distributed appropriately. So we do not discriminate against the people who come in front of us. Now, this can be hard. The reality is, if you work here for any length of time, you are very likely to eventually have to interact with somebody you might not like. It could be someone who's been accused of murder or rape or child molestation. In fact, we take filings from jails and prisons. It could even be someone who's been convicted of those crimes. They get the same efficient, friendly treatment everybody else gets. It's very important. We must be very careful how we speak. We avoid epithets and slurs and demeaning nicknames, suggestions of connection between, say, race and criminal behavior, or ethnicity or national origin and criminal behavior. We're very careful about what we say because we work in a place where people's nerves tend to be frazzled. Those of you who've been with us a while realize that not everybody who comes to the court is happy. Bit of an understatement perhaps, but no, it's true. Many people who come here are having a bad day. That's why they're here. Now, not every place. Do we have anyone with us today for marriage license, passport? No? Marriage license, that's a pretty happy place. I think at least 60% of people there are pretty happy about it. The other 40, there's probably room for debate. Passport, right? 50% of people going on vacation, 50% of people fleeing the country. Still? Juvenile adoption, we have anybody from juvenile adoption? No? Very happy place, right? People being adopted. But many people who come here are having a very rough time of it. It's very similar in that to being at the airport. You know how there's things that you'd say anywhere but the airport? So, see, Michelle, let's say that you decide to stay with us for a long, successful career. So years from now, you're retiring, and they throw you the retirement party, and they bring in the present. And there's always that one person who's got to make the joke like, better make sure it's not ticking. I never understood why that's fun. There's always that one. You better make sure it's not ticking. I don't know that joke's all that funny at all, but you know where it's never funny? The airport, right? Nobody makes that joke at the airport. Because if they're putting your bags through the handling system and someone goes, better make sure it's not ticking, things are about to go downhill. Right? Federal officers are going to snap on rubber gloves. We're going to go to a little room. There's going to be unpleasant conversations. Yeah. Nobody's going to be thrilled with that joke there. Here, things that might seem similarly innocent, doofy, kind of just a joke, they're not funny to the people that are here. And you'd be surprised at the things that people will notice that you wouldn't. Because you will, in very short order, become inured to all of this. At first, as you move through the courts, there's a certain weight to the whole thing. It's, just working your way through the buildings can be tough. But over time, you just get used to it. Other people don't. People who don't live here every day. When you go over to get your badges and fingerprinting, new folk, you're going to be going through a hallway. It's down there between the East Court building and the Central Court building. And you'll have a chance to see it. Along the walls, there are paintings of judges. Many of you have seen this hallway. Been here a while in the past? Yeah. I never gave much thought to it when I first got here, except that the judges were a little creepy because some of their eyes follow you. Always looked like a Scooby-Doo film. I was always a little nervous there looking at me. I never gave much thought to it, though. Just a hallway full of paintings of judges. One day years ago, though, I was walking down the hallway, and coming towards me, there was an African-American couple. They were going to court. They had paperwork in front of them. You could see the worried look, the trying to figure out where to go. And as they passed me, the husband leans over to his wife and goes, "None of these people look like us." And he was, of course, right. And I never thought about it because all of those people looked just like me. It's a hallway full of paintings of old white men, and I am an old white man. I never thought. But of course, when I took a moment to look, I realized there was one woman, there was one person who looked to be maybe of Asian descent, and that was it. Everything else, old white guy. If you are about to go into a room where people could be determining the fate of your family, your freedom, your finances, and it looked like everyone in power had never been in your neighborhood or had any cultural understanding from you, wouldn't that maybe concern you a bit? Now today, if you look at a photo of the modern bench, and they have one there, it's a much more diverse bench. There are many, many women, many people of color, but in the day, that's what this thing looked like. So we need to be very sensitive about such things. We have to watch our speech as well, because there are many people, as we said, only 38% of people trust the justice system. That means there's an awful lot that don't. We should never intimate any sort of implication that what goes on in a courtroom is other than fair and just and based on evidence. I was often frustrated during some big trials. The Arias trial is certainly one of them, but there have been others, where sometimes you'll hear court employees talking in the hallways. And they will be putting forward their opinions, like, oh, give her the chair. First of all, we don't even have a chair, right? We lack a chair as far as I know. We don't have the chair anymore. But all those issues aside, you have a right to your personal opinion, but when a court employee says such things in a work environment, what they're basically saying is, justice doesn't matter. Testimony doesn't matter. We should just be able to make a decision because I don't like this person or what they've been accused of. Those are not the sort of things we should be saying. We don't put forward personal opinions on the outcomes of cases in a work environment. And I would encourage you, even outside of the work environment, if you work within the courts, be very careful. Because some people will not hear that as simply, oh, you venting steam with a personal opinion. They'll rather hear it as, well, yeah, that's what the system's really like, you see. It is vital that you get good at what you do. Now, for many of you who've been here for years, I recognize many of your faces. This is doubtless true. But many of you do have a sense of how hard it can be. The reality is the work we do is complex and challenging. For those of you who are going to be courtroom clerks, you are up for months of training to even prepare you to be alone in that room. It is challenging. And those of you who are going to be filling other roles, there's plenty of other challenges within our system. It is vital that you get good at that work and that you are diligent and careful about it. It's work where it's important to dot the I's and cross the T's and check the dates, because small errors in this system can have immense consequences. A while back, an individual was asked to appear in a courtroom, and there was some confusion, and the individual did not appear, and a bench warrant was issued for their arrest. It was shortly discovered that mistakes had been made, and the bench warrant was ordered quashed. That's one of the words we use. You don't hear anywhere else, right? Only in the courts. To quash, to cancel, to get rid of. I'd like to use that for other things like, oh, it's a cockroach, quash it. You know, that sort of thing. Handy. Just quash it, pal. Clean up your room. I've had enough. Anyway, it was ordered quashed. Somebody forgot. Somebody messed up. Somebody did not follow through. So this individual was out driving with his family. Cop ran a plate for some reason. Maybe the light was out, something. Up comes the warrant, pulls the individual over, right there in front of his family, arrests him. Guy's going, this is a mistake. Yeah, that's what everybody says. Get in the car, pal. No, wait. Well, it so happened that this was on a weekend. And that adds other challenges to the process. And bottom line is this guy wound up basically bouncing around within our system for over a week before it was all straightened out. Well, there is, of course, the humiliation and the embarrassment of being arrested in front of your family. There is, of course, the lawsuit that will almost certainly follow. But it's by no means the worst such story. In New Mexico, a gentleman recently was arrested while driving drunk. He was put into solitary confinement. He was acting oddly. They began following their protocols for someone exhibiting signs of mental illness. Long story short, a year and a half later, this guy was still in solitary, and his family had no idea where he was the entire time. He degenerated to the point that he was simply incapable of identifying himself. All sorts of complexities arose. When his family did, of course, track him down, he will spend years of his life trying to recover from this. And, of course, New Mexico is facing a massive lawsuit. The simple reality is This is a job where you get the date wrong or a name wrong. Any little thing can make a big, big difference. It is like working in a hospital. The difference between 40 micrograms of a drug and 40 milligrams of a drug can be life or death. So it's vital that you get good at what you do. Be accurate, be timely, cooperate with other agencies. Good enough for government work does not apply at the clerk's office, and I'd like to state that it shouldn't apply at any of our agencies, and I hope that none of them would accept such a standard. One of the issues at the clerk's office we deal with, and that many of you will find is going to be central to the work you do, is giving information out to litigants. We exist in many ways to provide information. We store it, we collect it, give it out in various ways. So, learning the line that exists between legal information, which we can give out, and legal advice, which we cannot give out, is important. We, in fact, offer classes taught by an attorney. And if you're in a role where this is going to be important, there's every chance your supervisor will have you sit through those classes so you can understand this concept better. We can explain legal terms without providing interpretations to people. We can explain how to accomplish something without advising someone whether they should or not. So, for example, a filing counter. We have any people going to be in filing counters in our new folks today? Okay, there you go. Some already exist. Let's say you're in a situation where someone comes to the filing counter and they want to file for divorce. Okay, you want to file for divorce. Great. Paperwork, so much money, yada, yada. But imagine someone comes to the window and says, okay, look, my wife filed for divorce. We've only been married a couple years. There's no kids. There's not a lot of property. Truthfully, I'd like to just not deal with it. And someone told me that if I let it go into default, the whole process would just move forward without me being involved. But then someone else told me that if I don't respond, I have certain rights that may not be protected. But if I respond, then I might have to get a lawyer I don't even know, and there's money, and what do you think I should do? That's advice. Information says, here's the form, here's what it costs, you'll need to serve, you know, those sort of things. But once again asking, what should I do? Advice. Somebody may want to file a motion. And you might hand them the form. They could say, well, what goes here? Well, that's your name. See, it says name right there. Just put that. Case number, that's case number goes there. Date, sure. But they're eventually going to hit a box that might say something like reason for motion. What goes here? That's where you put the reason you're filing the motion. What do I write? That's where you have to stop. I can't give you the wording for that. That would be advice. I can tell you that's where the reason goes. You have to come up with the reason on your own. We give information, but we can't give advice. Now, oddly enough, there is one piece of advice we can always give. If you have a customer and they really don't know what to do and they seem confused and having a hard time, you can always recommend they seek legal counsel. That's a one piece of advice we can give. However, even that has limitations on it. We could say, sir, if you're confused as to how to move forward, I would suggest you seek legal counsel. We cannot recommend a specific law firm. We cannot say, you should hire Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe, finest divorce attorneys in the Valley. You know, that sort of thing. That's one of my two law firm names, Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. The other is Make 'em Pay More in Cash. Those are, I think, if I ever get attorneys together, I'm going to find guys with those names. Weird law firm name thing, too, comes to mind. Have you ever noticed how criminal defense firms in a large city, they often have the name of a tough animal? Right? They're always like, call the wolf, call the eagle. I always thought to myself, well, what happens in a really big city like LA where there must be hundreds of such firms? Because you'd run out of tough animals after a while, right? So eventually they have to be going like, call the hamster. We run 360, you know, we run on the wheel 24 hours a 7. Our cheeks are full of legal goodness. You know, what? Eventually you're going to have to really get down. Call the dolphin, you know, something. So we can always recommend they seek counsel, but we can't recommend a specific legal professional or firm. Any questions on this material? Wherever you work, whether you are a person who works behind the scenes, I largely work behind the scenes. By that I mean I'm not in a courtroom, I'm in here with you. Some of you will be right there on the front lines at filing counters and courtroom clerks. Others of you might be in a role similar to mine. But wherever you work, professionalism in this role is vital. There are many, many ways to understand professionalism. We offer many classes on the topic. But 3 basics: patience, respect, and courtesy. For those of you who've been here a while, you are aware that the public will not always be patient, respectful, or courteous to you. Now, I don't want to scare off the new people thinking that, everybody who comes here is some, scary, screaming creature. No, but the reality is many people who come to the courts are difficult. They're cranky, irritable, having challenges. Working here and complaining that people who come to the courthouse aren't always in the best moods is like working at a hospital and complaining that everybody is sick. Right? Like somebody going, "Oh, honey, yeah, my new nursing job, I think I'm going to have to leave." At a hospital, I think it's one of those sick buildings, right? Everybody's got the flu or cancer or something. Yeah, of course people here are cranky. It is an expensive, complex, scary system, and many of the people who are here are not here because they want to be. So you are going to deal with people that are challenging, and what those challenges will look like will even vary depending upon where you work. We have anybody from our Northwest branch? You're going to be working up at Northwest with us today? No? Okay. Well, up at Northwest, you're right near Sun City and retirement communities. So you have many customers who come in who are very elderly. And they are talking to you through 1 inch or so of bulletproof glass. So in those cases, sometimes you're going to have to raise your voice and speak a little more slowly. Because as we get older, sometimes our hearing is not what it used to be. If, on the other hand, you're up at Northeast, do we have anyone Fountain Hills? Northeast today? Not a lot of downtown folks, I guess. Okay, a lot of people from Scottsdale and PV. Entirely different set of problems might arise there. Downtown, yet another. Adult versus juvenile, definite distinctions. So depending where you work and what you do, you may face all sorts of different personalities and people with issues. We treat them all with patience and respect and courtesy. We must be very careful about how we communicate, particularly those of you who work in or near a courtroom. We do not ever want to communicate personal knowledge about a pending case to judges who are assigned to that case. There's very strict rules about what judges can and can't know and how things have to be found out and the discovery process attorneys go through and all those sorts of things. We also can't make statements that could impair the outcome of something that was pending. Some of you might remember, in, again, the recent Arias trial, you had 3 jurors. All found themselves dismissed from the jury pool for various issues along these lines. On our side, we have to be very careful how we speak to jurors. Many of you will work in buildings where there are going to be jurors present. You'll get to see them. They have badges on usually, and they wander around. And like a bailiff can fit 200 of them into an elevator. It's astonishing. They can just pack them in. But we must be very careful how we speak to jurors. Never discuss anything vaguely close to cases, the law, current events, things in the news. Don't discuss any of these things with jurors because you never know what kind of a case they're on or how what you might say or not say could influence them. In general, there's 2 safe topics to discuss with jurors, and they're the ones you're going to get asked about the most. They're going to ask you, where can I eat and where's the bathroom? In and out. Those are the 2 things we can generally safely discuss. We can give directions, but other than that, we do our best not to speak with jurors. We also have to be careful with the information we're given. We never release information until the court authorizes it. It is vital in cases that all the parties involved learn of decisions at the same time. in a way authorized by the court. The consequences of that not happening can be immense, even in a civil case. Imagine a large civil case such as we recently saw between Apple and Samsung, right? Billions of dollars on the line. Imagine that a judge had reached a decision in that case and that information about that decision was released to the one party before the other. You could run home, short sell that stock, buy, you could just have all sorts of financial manipulation that might occur. Let's talk about some of the problems that we can run into as employees. The first is conflict of interest. For those of you that this is your first day, you should all have filled out conflict of interest forms. Did they give you those this morning? Okay, it's very important you keep those up to date. Existing employees, same thing. You have an obligation to update your conflict of interest form anytime such a conflict arises. So let's talk about what those are. A conflict is where a potential issue arises where your role as a person in an official position and your private interests are in conflict with one another. We try to avoid these wherever we can, but when we can't, we have an obligation to inform our chain of command, our judicial officer, depending where we work, and in some cases we may have to withdraw ourselves from various types of proceedings. There's all sorts of things that could be a conflict of interest. In general, anything where your economic interests or those of someone whom you are closely related to. Now, the language here says a close family member, but that has been understood to also mean people with whom you have an intimate relationship. So if you had a live-in boyfriend or a live-in girlfriend, this would still apply. Some examples. Let's say you have a cousin and your cousin is going through a divorce, and that divorce is being heard in our court, Superior Court. You now have a potential conflict of interest. That's a close family member, and there is that potential. So you would go down to HR and you would update your conflict of interest form. If you are a courtroom clerk, obviously you could not clerk that case, but that's not necessarily all that likely to begin with. But even so, a conflict does exist. So you would notify. Another possibility. Jennifer, do you have any siblings? Okay. Let's say you're with us a couple years, and eventually you are assigned to duty as a supervisor. And now you're interviewing people for jobs here. And brother?
Yes.
Okay. Let's say your brother applied to work here. You cannot be on the panel that interviews your brother for a position. That's a conflict of interest. It could also be nepotism, depending on how the hiring is going to go and who he's going to work for. Now, here's the thing. Do you think you're a fair person?
Yeah.
Are you a person that even if it were your own brother, you could put that aside and judge fairly in that circumstance?
I'd like to think so.
Okay. Well, me too. Here's the thing. For this purpose of this, it just doesn't matter. All that matters is the appearance. You might very well be such a person. You might also be the kind of person who wouldn't give your brother a job. Right? You might be biased the other way. You might not be willing to give your brother CPR, let alone a job. And again, it doesn't matter. The implication would reasonably exist that you would be biased in favor of your own family. So in that circumstance, you would have to step out. You'd have to say, I'm sorry, I cannot be on the panel interviewing because my brother is applying for this job. If a case were assigned to a courtroom clerk where they have a personal interest, either we're going to have to move the clerk or move the case or do something to deal with that potential conflict. Conflicts only apply to our court, so in this case, Superior Court. So if, Christy, let's say that your dad sadly files for bankruptcy. That's not a conflict for us because bankruptcy is a federal matter. It's not heard in our court. Or Betty, let's say you have a sister who gets busted for possession out in Pima County. Not a conflict for us because it's not our court. It's out there. Conflict only applies within our court, etc. Any questions on conflict? The way conflict will be handled is going to be based on the degree of conflict. It could be something very, very small. In a situation such as having a cousin who's going through a divorce, your supervisor would really probably just say, okay, well, stay out of the records and act appropriately, and that'd be that. Not much concern. If it were something more severe, if it's, again, a sister and it just so happened it appeared in your courtroom, or let's say you do part-time work and you work part-time for Nordstrom. You could not be the clerk if Nordstrom were being sued in court. You'd have a conflict there. And in some cases, such as the one I described where you're on a panel to interview, you'd have to recuse yourself from that. You would step out of that altogether. So it's going to vary based on those sorts of things. Now, under the code, we have rules about chain of command and relatives, right? Using that same standard, including close, intimate relationships, that says you may not be directly supervised by or work for someone who is directly supervised by a close connection. And the same would be true for two levels beneath you. You could not supervise someone or be the supervisor of someone who supervises someone to whom you have a close relationship. But this is an area where the clerk's office follows the stricter code of Maricopa County that says you may not be in the same chain of command with someone with whom you have a personal relationship, no matter how many steps separate you. This is one of those where if you're with another agency, you'd have to check with your agency as to how they deal with this issue. So I work for Lois Rees, and she works for Chris Kelly, the chief deputy, and she works for Michael. So that's my upstream chain. If my wife were to take Chris's job, I could not continue in this position. She is the supervisor of my supervisor, so that wouldn't work. Nor could I hire her to work for me, nor if I had an employee, she couldn't work for that person anywhere. However, that doesn't mean she couldn't work anywhere in the clerk's office. If she took a job, say, as a courtroom clerk, or in docketing, or as a courier, I'm not in a direct chain of command with those, and so there wouldn't be any problem there. Any issues with this? Okay. Now, I did not grow up in Arizona. I was a Marine. I traveled all over. I started out in New Jersey. I was born in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. And I lived around there as I was a kid. My son, never been to New Jersey. It's been that many years since I've been back. He actually says to me, Dad, you're from New Jersey, aren't you? Mm-hmm. Yes, I am. He says, is it like the Jersey Shore, Dad? A lot of Guidos? Yes, son, that's how I remember. That's what New Jersey was like, exactly. I have my spray on tan somewhere around here. Let me track that down. So do I have anyone here who's from somewhere other than Arizona or was born somewhere else? All right, sir, where are you from? Ohio, ma'am. California. Iowa. Sir. India, all right. Over here I saw. California, okay. Anyone else? Yes?
New York.
Oh, New York. I got there any number of times. Oregon, very nice. Now, of course, neighborhoods differ. I grew up in sort of blue-collar New Jersey, truthfully. I don't know what part of your state that you lived in or where you grew up. And a very important rule I learned growing up in New Jersey, don't snitch. This was an absolutely vital concept. We do not snitch. New Jersey had fun phrases like, snitches get stitches, and snitches end up in ditches. That's why I don't go back there anymore. But I mean, one of the rules I learned growing up, and maybe some of you did in your neighborhoods, was you don't rat. You don't think on other people. You see somebody doing stuff, it's none of your business. My mom worked in a bar, and people would often come in and they would be selling things like crates of crab or dresses or TV sets. And when people would ask where did it come from, it was always a standard line. It fell off the loading dock. That was the standard concept there. So I'm pretty sure it violated code of conduct in those things. But here's the thing. In this job, you're expected to snitch. You're expected to rat. We, under the code, have a positive duty, an obligation to report suspected impairment of any kind, violations of the law, or violations of code. with anyone that is covered under the code. This can be very challenging. It's not many people's nature to do this, and particularly if you're dealing with a supervisor or a person in a position of power, and yet it's absolutely essential. As a courtroom clerk, you're going to be assigned to a judge at some point, and you may work with that judge for quite some period of time. Imagine if you were to begin to understand that your judge was somehow impaired. Maybe they had a back injury, and so they were prescribed some medication for that. But it's been a long time, and that judge is still taking that medication. They seem to be taking an awful lot of it. You notice that their speech is slurred. You notice they begin forgetting things. They begin acting erratically. There will come a point where you will have to go, I suspect impairment, and you will have an obligation under code to report that judge. That will not be a pleasant moment. You are, of course, protected by every form of law, federal, state, HR code, everything. But if you have to turn to a judge or turn to a supervisor and you have to go and report that they are impaired in their judgment, it could be alcohol or drugs. It could be a situation where you become aware that something's gone on in their life and now they're acting erratically. Somebody goes through a divorce. Somebody loses a child. Terrible trauma. But you have an obligation. The same would be true for violations of code, violations of law. Catherine, let's say that you discover you have a coworker. Every weekend they're rolling out the door with reams of copy paper, boxes of pens, the occasional computer monitor, this sort of thing. Again, there are many people who just go, well, none of my business. That's them, that's not me. Here, that won't fly. You have a positive obligation to report. And it's important to understand, if you should fail to do so, and they are discovered, and it is discovered that you knew and said nothing, you can be charged with violations of code just as they can. So we have a positive duty to report. This can be tough. And it doesn't mean every time you discover a coworker's 4 miles over the speed limit, or you caught him jaywalking, to go, yeah, that Legander guy said no jaywalking. Time to, you get out your camera phone and this sort of thing. But it does mean that we must watch one another and that we are accountable to one another. If no one is willing to watch the system, then how can the system ever be trusted by those who don't have eyes inside of it, who aren't part of it? So we have to watch ourselves and our colleagues. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yes,
Now,
please.
once a report is made, is there an investigation?
There would be, of course. And the nature of that investigation would vary based on the kind of issue you brought forward. Let's say, for example, a colleague was coming back from lunch regularly. They smelled of whiskey. They were staggering. That would be a supervisory HR sort of investigation. If you were dealing with an issue of a judge's behavior, then you might end up with various judicial bodies involved in that. But certainly there would be some form of investigation.
And how does that affect your job? Are you put on like probation?
Not at all. There are circumstances where you would maybe, if you were working for that judge, having the two of you work together might be a conflict there, so they might assign you to a different judge during that time. I couldn't speak more specifically because it would vary, but certainly making such a report will never put you on unpaid leave or any of those kind of things. But yes, there is no question that you could have a circumstance where the nature of what you've reported would mean that an investigation is going to go forward, and that's going to certainly take some time and energy. But no, you cannot be put on unpaid leave or anything along those lines. Okay? Anyone else? Canon 3. A judicial employee shall conduct activities outside of judicial employment to minimize the risk of conflict with the obligations of judicial employment. I've always felt this was the scariest canon because it's not even talking about work, is it? This is talking about outside of work, what we're to do and how we're to do things. Because our responsibilities do not end at the end of the day or at the courthouse door, we must consider the rest of our lives. We cannot create situations where we're regularly going to create conflicts of interest in our role in the courts. Do we have anybody here who's a big animal lover? Somebody, fair number of pets? Who's got some pets? All right, well, let's check it out. What do you got?
A cat and 2 dogs.
Cat and 2 dogs. I was hoping for a little bit more upscale there. Cat and 2 dogs. Big numbers. Okay, but still. Yeah. What do you got?
Dogs.
How many dogs? 2. Okay. Guys, bring the game up. Come on. Who's got, what do you got over here?
I have 4 dogs, 2 cats, 2 rabbits, a bird, and we used to raise alpacas.
That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Noah's Ark. That's what I want to hear about. All right. Anyone else? Animals. Can top that? All right, my current animal count, 2 dogs, 1 cat, 1 turtle, 2 sugar gliders, a parrot, and half a horse. We lease the horse. We share it with someone else. By the way, horse leasing tip, always take the front half. All right, because, more feeding, less cleanup. It's something. All right. So let's say, being the animal lover that you are, you decide you want to become involved with some environmental causes. Maybe you join the local Sierra Club. Maybe you even rise to be the president of the local Sierra Club. It's all fine, as long as the local Sierra Club's doing bird walks and nature trails and learning the life cycle of the alpaca, that sort of thing. But if your local Sierra Club turns out to be a particularly litigious organization and is suing regularly in our court various agencies for environmental issues, you could not keep existing within that role and do this job. You'd be in a constant state of conflict. Another typical thing might be an HOA. We have anyone who's the president of their HOA board. Sure, most HOA issues are handled in municipal court, but if for whatever reason you had HOA issues being handled in our court, if your HOA was particularly litigious so that you were party to numerous cases throughout the year, that would produce too many conflicts. There's lots of different things that can occur this way. Outside work conducted during business hours. If you want to sell real estate part-time, good luck to you. But you can't use our phone to do it, our email, that sort of thing. Or things that require the use of our equipment, our fax machines, etc. A lot of times this would preclude you doing work, whether it be paid or volunteer work, for the police or various law type things, public defender, prosecutor, stuff like that, simply because you're likely to run into conflicts. If you're an attorney, again, depending on the roles you might take, you'd have to be very careful about those. Any posse members, sheriff's posse? Right, that's another one where, you might just find yourself having too many conflicts. Now, there are certain roles where conflicts do arise, but are protected status, so to speak. The first of those would be a foster parent. If you've done any work in the foster care system, you realize that foster parents do have to spend some time in court. That's just how that goes. And that's perfectly fine. You will never find yourself challenged on conflict based around that. You are also permitted by law to write, speak, lecture, book tours, all that sort of stuff on any topic you would like. If you want to write a 500-page book on the death penalty in Arizona, a history, you can be pro-death penalty, against death penalty, whatever you'd like. All you have to do is make sure that whether you're speaking or writing, you make clear that these are your opinions, not those of the Arizona judicial system, the clerk's office, etc. We must be very careful with the information we're given, particularly those of you who are new. You'll discover there's all sorts of levels of confidentiality we have. We have juvenile cases which are sealed. We have other cases which are not. We have different sorts of records that are accessible in different ways, some electronic, some not. We must always be very careful with non-public information, that it's never released or used for personal gain or any inappropriate cause. But this also applies to information that you might gain here that's not part of the official record. Because of the nature of your work, you could find yourself in a hallway or a bathroom or some sort of conference room where you could overhear something. It's not part of the official record anywhere. It's maybe two attorneys talking or a judge discussing something with a colleague. That information, too, is protected by confidentiality. You must not share that information. The people who work here must be able to trust that they can speak freely in areas where that's appropriate without it being used inappropriately. The other areas where this breaks in is, first of all, each other's personal information. It is vital that you be very sensitive to other people's information. Never give out locating data on a colleague to anyone that you do not know. Things like address, the number of children, anything that someone could use, because there are people who come here with bad intent. And there are people who simply decide they're angry, and so you're the one who's going to pay. So you could say receive a phone call. Maybe Danielle, a phone call comes in one day. Oh, hi. Yeah, this is Crystal's husband. We were supposed to meet for lunch, and I forgot to ask her where the restaurant was. She's not answering her cell. Do you know where she's eating lunch? Never give that information up. You'd be surprised at things people will try. That could be Crystal's husband. It could also be some guy who's just decided he's very unhappy with her about something that she did in a courtroom or she did at a filing counter window. The right answer to any such query is always, I'm afraid I can't give out information like that, but if you'll give me a phone number, I'll get it to her as soon as I can. We never give out locating details on each other. We're sensitive and careful to that. One other issue that arises is that if you work here long enough, odds are you're going to see somebody you know. That's how it goes. It's that woman across the street, those kids down the block, the upstairs neighbor. And there's going to be that temptation to run home to the spouse using the spousal secrecy exception that applies, that you can say anything to your spouse, right? And go home and go, oh, honey, you won't believe what's going on. The Jacksons are getting divorced. And, oh, wait till you hear what's going on. And, of course, the reality is that, well, other than the NSA, who apparently knows everything, we don't have direct access to their equipment, though, so we cannot know what you say in the privacy of your bedroom. I would ask you to apply a rule that you will not find in the Arizona revised statutes to such situations. It is a much older one. It is the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Many people who come here are going through some of the most embarrassing and difficult times of their life. Issues of divorce and custody and financial failure and jobs breaking down and relationships. You wouldn't want someone to go back to your neighborhood and spread all the stories about what's going on if it were you or your daughter or your son. Offer other people the same courtesy. We have an obligation. There's information we give out by law. Everything else, we're like Vegas. What happens here stays here. Give other people the courtesy that you would want in those circumstances. Let's talk a bit about solicitation. Now, not the one kind of solicitation, because I told you, no illegal activities. This is people coming around and asking for money. Now, under the code, there's actually a very complex set of rules about who can ask for what kind of money and what environment they can do it in. There's different rules for people who work close to judges, like clerks and courtroom managers, as opposed to general court employees, such as myself. But this is one of those areas where the clerk's office simply follows the more restrictive Maricopa County rule. We do not allow solicitation for funds, period. We run a Toys for Tots campaign each year. All we do with that is we put up like a box in our break room, and people can come and throw toys into it if they want to. County, you will see advertisements come through email for various charitable things. That's got nothing to do with us. That's just county sending it downstream. Now, to be realistic, this does have some soft edges to it. Anybody here have a daughter who sells Girl Scout cookies? Girl Scout cookies? None? Where am I going to get my Thin Mints? What's up? Okay. Okay. You know, if your daughter sells Girl Scout cookies and you go up to a colleague, somebody you know, and are like, hey, Michelle, you want some Thin Mints? It's like a drug deal, okay? You go out into the parking lot. All right, yeah, here's the Thin Mints, man. Yeah, first load's free. You know how it goes. In other words, if you discreetly hand off a box of Thin Mints to a colleague and a few bucks are given you in the parking lot, nobody's going to come hunting. Okay, in the same sense, if, Avon or Mary, hey, you want some face cream? Yeah, meet me outside. I got, right here. It's the good stuff. Oprah uses this. Again, not going to be an issue. On the other hand, if you're stocking inventory at your desk and you're even makeovers, people are going by, they're getting spritzes, dragging a wagon around, doling out the cookies, problems will ensue. Okay, we cannot solicit. So this would include things like that. The catalog schools always give you, your kids are in school. They always want you to raise money for band uniforms or tubas. You ever notice how many school catalogs, by the way, consist of things that are bad for your cardiovascular system? It's like cookie dough and summer sausage. Those are, you want a giant sausage? Oh, okay, how about this thing of cookie dough? How about EKG? How would you feel about that? So you might consider those sorts of things. But this could also be political causes, environmental causes, religious causes. Any of those sorts of things would be things where you go, nope, not in the workplace. We may not solicit or ask for or try to contribute gifts, gratuities, favors, free tickets, loans, any form of money to anybody who is involved with the courts or Maricopa County, our agencies, or others in any way. We must always avoid even the appearance of bribery or unjust treatment. This would include people who are litigating in the courts or involved with the courts or contracted or in any other sort of thing. It's very, very broad. There are some small exceptions we can make. Gifts of $25 or less per occurrence and of no more than $50 per source. So, Dusky, let's say that you're working on one of our, we have Qmatic. It's this system we put in for tickets and that sort of thing for people going to Windows. And you're working with the Qmatic vendors, and on the way back from doing some work, they go to you, hey man, you want to grab McDonald's? It's on me. You got 25 bucks. Live large, right? Yeah, sure. You go on, splurge. It's 25 bucks. That Mickey D's, that's like the 20-piece McNugget, right? The 64-ounce illegal in New York drink you can ask for. Yeah, hit it hard. Feel free. And if the next day they want to take you back and your stomach can bear it, do it again, right? Hit them up for another 25. But once you breach $25 in a given incident, or $50 total from that source, day 3, if the vendor's still trying to get you go to Mickey D's, sorry, we're at 50. That's it. Can't go any further. My wife works for a company where they have pharmaceutical reps come in, and they bring in these people to sell them pharmaceuticals, which is big money. So they take her and the executive team out for these very big meals where they ply them with wine and try to get them to, which I don't know if that's really a good idea, try to get you drunk so you'll buy drugs. Shouldn't that be something we're dealing with here in the courts, honestly? But they'll take these guys to Ruth's Chris, and they'll drop like 25 grand on dinner. It's like, $200, $300, $400 a plate. I've often thought under the code, if I were invited to such a thing, I'd have to order a potato. Right? Because I think a potato is like 25 bucks. That's all I could get. I'd have to bring butter from home. So clearly she has the better job. You can always accept ordinary social hospitality, right? You can accept a bottle of water, a cookie, CPR, these sort of things. If you're passed out on the sidewalk in heat stroke, don't give me the water, it's a code violation, just. If you're going to get an award for charity, or if they're going to give you an honorary degree, anybody have an honorary degree coming from somebody? Yeah. All right, so as long as Michael approves, right, appointing authority, that's great. Free pen, free journal, but again, common sense. Somebody offers you a plastic pen that says, Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe on the law firm, that's fine. If it's a gold cross pen that says that, no, now you're way over budget. If you travel on county business, you're going to speak at a conference, you're going to be reimbursed for travel, lodging, that's fine. If your spouse gets nice things, you are allowed to use them. If your spouse gets a Lexus from their company, you're permitted to drive it. Let them know I said so. It's fine. And you'll see that county offers all sorts of discounts and loans and scholarships and things like that. You're permitted to take advantage of all of those things. They're being offered to non-county employees as well. For those of you who are brand new, lots of sweet deals, by the way. Every year, like the Halloween haunted houses, they have discounts on those, movie tickets, theme park. A while back, they had SeaWorld. They had discount SeaWorld tickets. They were, I think, $70. Thought, wow, what is full price at SeaWorld? So, but nonetheless, you're permitted to take advantage of all those sorts of things. Any questions about that sort of stuff? Let's go to Canon 4 then. A judicial employee or candidate for judicial department office shall not engage in political or campaign activity that is inconsistent with the independence, integrity, or impartiality of the judiciary. So now we get into our political issues. The judicial branch in our country has a bit of a tough call because on the one hand, you guys remember from civics class, we have like the three branches of government, right? Legislative, executive, judicial. They're supposed to be equal and opposite powers. They possess checks and balances to make sure that no one branch gains all the power for itself. And so the judicial branch should have no involvement with political matters. Practically, that becomes very hard to do. Every time a major case is announced, right, they'll say a big decision was announced. What's the news do? It was a 5-judge panel, 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans, right? They'll tell you their political background, which should have nothing to do with it. The courts in Arizona work to maintain neutrality in the political process, as we should. And the prime way we do that is that we, who work for the courts, may not engage in any political activities at all during working hours. We don't try to talk people into voting our way or promoting causes or signing flyers or anything along those lines. Judicial employees, of course, may still participate in the electoral process. You can do anything that anyone else could do. We just don't do it in such a way that we're doing it at work or leaving the impression that it's the courts themselves who are supporting these candidates or causes. So, petitions, we can certainly circulate them. We just can't circulate them at work. We can advocate the election or defeat of candidates or causes. And we can solicit contributions. We just can't do them while we're at work. There's a complex set of rules involving our own ability to run for office, but at present those are made quite simple because in Arizona there is a law that basically says you must resign from an office such as ours, working in the judicial branch, if you wish to run for any public office that is either paid or partisan. Paid, we all know what that is, although we don't get paid that much maybe. But partisan, if it's an office where it's held by a party, like a Democratic seat, a Republican seat, that sort of thing. So if you wanted to run for mayor or governor or sheriff or clerk, you want to take Michael's job, you can't do that while you work here. You would have to resign this position when you announce for that. Now there are some exceptions. You may run for an office that you already hold. So Michael can run for re-election. Sheriff Joe could run for re-election. But if Sheriff Joe wanted to run for governor, he would have to resign as sheriff when he announces for governor. That sort of thing. Right now, the other elements of the code are all superseded by this state law. If this law were to be challenged, then there'd be a new set of rules we'd have to go out with as to what sort of things we can do and what we can't. The other exception to this are nonpartisan offices. You can run for an unpaid nonpartisan office. Now there aren't a whole lot of them, to be honest. There's some. Many school boards, for example, are unpaid nonpartisan offices. There are a few other similar positions. Other than those, you would not be able to run. For these, you would simply need the permission of your appointing authority, so in our case, Michael, and they would have to determine that the work you're going to do is consistent with your work in the judicial system, that you can follow the code within those boundaries. It's worth noting all of this only applies to political office. So if you wanted to run for the board of your HOA, the vestry of a church, the board of a synagogue, all those sorts of things, none of that has any application here. Do we have anyone here who is a political office holder at present? It's always worth checking. So, in compliance with this, when we are at work, we may not engage in any political activities, and that would include wearing buttons, flyers, hats, handing out brochures, passing around petitions, or anything else that would put forward a political position. And particularly for those of you who are existing employees, because this is new in the code, this includes vehicles in lots reserved and identified for court personnel. Under the new version of the code, you may not have political bumper stickers on your car if you park in a court lot. Now that's new. So, as you might guess, when we heard that was going in, we went, uh-oh, because there's plenty of people that have political stickers on their car. So we went to the Attorney General and we requested a ruling. This is how the clerk's office has decided we're going to enforce this rule. Again, if you're with an agency other than ours, you might want to check with your personnel, your supervision, as to how they've decided to enforce it. First of all, the law says that we cannot have such stickers on vehicles. So we are obligated to follow the law. The law, however, does not require us to go out and look for such stickers. So the clerk's office has said, look, we're not going to go touring the parking lots looking for people with Obama stickers or Romney stickers. However, if someone comes in to complain, we have no choice but to follow the law. We would have to ask you to either remove the sticker or remove your vehicle. So I'd urge you to give some thought to what that might mean. The reality is, if your car on the back says Obama 2012, Romney 2012, Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, whatever it might be, the odds that somebody's going to come running in to tell on that are pretty small. But there are political bumper stickers, and you probably know what I'm talking about. They're not so simple. They have things on them designed to annoy, frustrate, or insult people who think differently than you do about politics. Or it demeans people of the other party, or degrades people who think differently than you. That's precisely the sort of bumper sticker that somebody might get their dander up enough to decide to come in and say something. So if you've got stuff like that in your car, you can expect there could be a problem. A number of years back, I was coming into the parking garage and slammed on my brakes, almost got rear-ended. There was a pickup truck that had been parked. This was when they had visitor parking in the bottom part of it. And in the back window in big letters it said, "United we stand, white power." Okay, do you have a right to put that on your car? Yes. Will your car be in that parking lot for more than a few minutes? No. They are going to tow that thing right out of there. So, the reality is that if you put things on your car that are offensive, and that one, by the way, goes well beyond this issue, that gets into violations of code because of the racial and racist elements of it. But even things less egregious, but that still insult or demean somebody, there's a real possibility someone's going to come running in. You'll have to decide, do you want the sticker or do you want the parking spot? You can't make you take the sticker off, you just have to park on the street. So you want to take a look at what those meters cost and then give thought to it. Now, understand this only applies to political bumper stickers. It doesn't apply to things like the church you go to, the dog you own, you have a Bichon on board, that thing where you have like the little weird thing of all your kids and family leaned up on there. You're a Star Trek fan. You know what? All that's totally separate from this. This is only political issues. Any questions on that? Okay. Additionally, you may not use your power, your authority, if you're in a supervisory position particularly, to intimidate others or to try to make them vote the way you think they should, or to treat them poorly because they vote in some other way. We never discriminate against people on account of permitted political activities, whether we agree with them or not. We are permitted to contribute to judges' campaigns or to the clerks' campaigns if we want to, but we would never bring them money. We would not walk into Michael's office, hey, here's $500. We would donate money through their committees, etc. Now, I said at the beginning of our class that this class would not be exhaustive, and you may at this point be debating, but come on, there's a lot of topics we have not covered, a lot of possible things. No code could cover everything. What we ask you to do is take the principles you've learned here and apply them with common sense. A test that we use that you might find valuable, we call the headline test. The headline test is simple. Imagine that you are about to do or say something as an agent of the courts, or in our case, of the clerk's office. For example, many of you are probably parked in the lot across the street. New folks, they got you in a lot across there? Yeah, so you have guard. We're in various areas around here. Because we're in this downtown area, there are many homeless people you will see on the streets. You may leave our building, and as has happened upon rare occasion, a homeless person could accost you. They could get in your face, they could say something rude or sexist or inappropriate. In very rare instances, somebody could try to grab you. Now, if an individual grabs you on the street, says something nasty to you, maybe even spits on you, ugh, what would you do? Ma'am, what are you going to do? Run. Always a good bit of advice. Flee, right? Flee from that circumstance. Get away. Sir, how about you?
I see him every day. I'm used to it.
Okay, maybe no big deal, right? Ken, what do you got?
I ignore him.
Try to ignore. Okay. Ken, you got?
I do everything. I won't run, but
Okay.
ignore him.
Stand your ground.
I can, but
I understand.
that headline comes into play.
You see,
Happened, quite frankly.
right, the reality is that depending on your own nature, your response might naturally be anything from flee to punch them in the head, right? Dun, dun, dun. You might think, oh, I'll shut. Now, here's the thing. Truthfully, if you've been grabbed and spat upon, you've been insulted, and you've been assaulted. You have every right to defend yourself. You could scream and shove that person back and try to knock them to the ground. Let go of me, let go of me. You have every right. But should they fall to the ground, what you cannot do is try to give them a few more shots because you are angry and humiliated. It is in moments like that that the best of us have that Mel Gibson moment where things come out of your mouth that would not come out of your mouth under normal circumstances because you are angry and you are humiliated. And it is at that moment that you apply the headline test. It is that moment, foot raised, ready, where you just think, if the thing I'm about to say, if the action I'm about to commit were to appear on the front page of tomorrow's Arizona Republic, that's the photo image of the court employee. What would the average citizen think? What would a person think? There you are kicking this homeless guy down the street while yelling racial invective or something at him. If it involves a case, what would the opposing parties or counsel think? Is the thing you're about to do or say truly reflective of the integrity of the judicial system? Because remember, you might not think it's fair. You might go, but wait, I was afraid. He grabbed me. He called me a name. And you're right. But there are many, many people who will never hear that part of the story or who won't care. You are representative here of something bigger than your own dignity. And that's the dignity of the court, which we must protect. When you are in doubt as to how to handle a situation, in almost all cases, you have the opportunity here to pause. Pause. Particularly those of you who it's your first day, this system is complex. We quash things. Here, a tort does not have lemon anywhere inside of it. We use language like pro se, pro per. I don't know. We use a lot of strange language, And it's a place where small details make a big difference. So don't rush, don't bullet through and try to figure it out. Pause. Speak to your supervisor. It's always appropriate to take a moment and say, "Sir, I'd like to take a moment to confer with my supervisor. I want to make sure this gets handled correctly for you. Ma'am, this is actually my first week on the job. I need to make sure this is done right. I'm going to speak to a colleague. Give me a moment, please." This is a place where it pays to measure twice and cut once, where it is much easier to not make a mistake than it is to have to go back and fix mistakes. So take your time, use good judgment. You represent something very large, very powerful, and of great importance. And people will judge your behavior as the worth and value of this entire system, whether it's fair or not. Another issue that you may find yourself dealing with here in Arizona particularly is dealing with people who English is their second language. This can occur in any state, but we do have a large population of people here in the state who speak Spanish, and we have many other smaller populations who do not necessarily speak English all that well. Under Title VI of the United States Federal Code, we and every other agency who receives money from the federal government have an obligation to provide assistance to people whose English is not quite good enough to let them keep up in our environment. This is considered an access to justice issue. Imagine what it would be like to find yourself in a system like this with all of its complexities and the stresses of it and not even be able to understand what's being said. How frustrating and frightening that would be. So we have a legal and a moral obligation here. We define a person as having limited English proficiency as an individual that either doesn't speak English at all or their grasp of English is not strong enough to let them really understand what's happening. I used to be a translator for the military. I worked in military intelligence for years, and I learned Spanish, and I was once quite fluent in it. Nowadays, I don't get nearly as much use out of it just due to the nature of my job. I can still order dos cervezas and that sort of thing. But I would not want someone in a courtroom to be dependent upon my explanation to keep them out of prison at this point. So that would be my version of limited proficiency. The way we deal with this at the clerk's office is through the use of a language line. Ma'am, could I borrow your handout for just a moment? It looks like this. You've all been given a copy of this. It's red. The language line is a pay-per-use interpreter service. The way it works is if we have someone in front of us or on a phone and they speak a language we don't understand, we can call the language line and they will put an interpreter on. We can then either pass the phone back and forth, or if we're in a phone call, we can go to a three-party call and we can straighten it out that way. Now you might go, well, wait a minute, Joe. How do I know what language they speak if I don't speak it? If you'll turn your handout to its next few pages, you will see we have what are called I Speak cards. Now these are available at all of our frontline areas. And basically they're a set of cards that just say over and over again in different languages, I speak Mandarin, I speak Basque, or whatever it might be. So we would hand the individual that card. They would be able to check off, this is the language I speak, and that's how we'll know what to ask for. Now, I'm sure you'll note that the card doesn't have every language on earth on it. I think there are over 4,000 spoken languages at this point, so it would have to be a long card. But these reflect the languages that we statistically find most commonly here in Maricopa County. So that's why they're there. In the courtroom, we have court interpreter service that come in and handle these things. This is for our more frontline issues. When dealing with this stuff, it's important not to judge by appearances. You can't look at somebody who looks like Superman and go, well, they must speak English. He just looks like he's from Kansas. Nor can you have somebody, they could come in a garb that seems very exotic and go, well, they clearly don't. You have no idea. The only way to know if somebody is fluent in a language is to speak to them. So we always take time to check and to ask if they need assistance. For Spanish, the reality is we have so many Spanish speakers on staff, most areas will have somebody who can handle that without needing to go to the language line. Your supervisor will let you know if you have a local Spanish speaker. And if you are very fluent in Spanish, make sure you let your supervisor know so that they could call upon you if they need help there. But for others, we'll use these services. In the rare circumstance where we have multiple people needing this kind of assistance at once, we would give priority to the more urgent situations. Somebody, for example, needing an order of protection might beat out more routine matters. For those of you who this is your first day, of course, we talk about this in NEO, and there is a video that you must watch within your first 6 months of employment. This is very important. The link is here. Your supervisor can also get you to it. For those of you, this is your first day, you have a sheet. It says the Title VI acknowledgement form, and there's two of them, a department copy and a personal copy. I'm going to need you to sign and date that department copy, and I'm going to collect those up when we're finished. The other is for your personal records, but know that you need to go online at this link and watch this video. It's about 2 hours long during your first 6 months. We highlight these Title VI issues in many other of our classes to bring them to mind. Those of you working for other court agencies, your courts too are under Title VI and have to have in place a way to deal with these issues. However, your plan may differ from ours, so check with your own supervisory staff. Failure to assist a customer who has a limited English proficiency problem is not only a moral failing, where we're allowing somebody to not get the help they need, it's also a violation of federal code, and even failing to help a single such individual can result in expensive audits and lawsuits and challenges. So it's vital that we never fail to do so. If you have questions or concerns, you have that rare instance where the card's not helping, we don't know what language they speak to your supervisor. So, at the end of our time today, it's my hope that a few weighty issues have been impressed upon you. The first is the gravity and the importance of what you do for all of those of you who are new, as well as for those of you who've been here for some time. You work in places and positions of great power, of great trust. Things that completely reshape the lives of individuals and organizations and families occur within the boundaries and context of the place that we work. You must always uphold that trust. The independence, the integrity, the impartiality of the courts. We must always be competent in what we do, skillful and diligent and responsive, avoiding conflict and abuse of power, and recognizing that our ethical duties always have to come first. Do I have any questions on any of the material that I've covered here today? Then I will thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you.
More than welcome.